One of the joys, as I shared a sense of purpose, was when we launched the worldwide inquiry into business as an agent of world benefit. And it was not an answer, it was a question. What does it look like? Where is it happening? Business as a force for peace in high conflict zones. Business as a force for the eradication of extreme poverty. Business as a force for human development. Business as a force for this transition period to a completely 100% renewable energy era. And I have to say, the interviews that we've done are just astonishing, eye-opening. We're going to hear a lot of stories as part of our, as we've evolved our world inquiry into business as an agent of world benefit into this idea of flourishing and aim to flourish. But all of it's been focused on our vision of a world where business can excel and people can thrive and nature can flourish. And I feel so much hope about this. So when I think back to that young person at Tesla, I thought about right after I talked with him, I went back to this quote by Howard Thurman: "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do it." Because that's what the world needs, is people who come alive. And I saw that in that kid, and I saw that in that company, and I think that's what we're here to study and to learn about, is that idea of full spectrum flourishing and flourishing enterprise. Now, the other part that's just where I just feel so much gratitude is kind of, it feels like a family in the Fowler Center, and so, we often use the term the Fowler Center family. And we have people that are making this work possible. And the board meetings, for example, I've never been part of a board like this, where we are in almost spiritual terms going into the deepest level conversations of purpose, meaning, value, significance. And I just want to ask our board to stand up, and I don't have time to say a lot, but just a couple words about each person. So from left to right, Jacqueline Kambata, she's a world-changing entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, creating dignified work all over the world. She's an artist. Her porcelain work and her porcelain social entrepreneurship is creating jobs for people all over the world. And in a few minutes, I'll ask the whole board to stand up. Lyle Clark is the president and chief operating officer of Clark, and recently the recipient of the U.S. President's Award for Green Chemistry. And when you go into this company, it's alive. It's alive with collaboration and empowerment. And I'm learning every day from their project called Project Greater Purpose. Chuck Fowler, he's the namesake of our Fowler Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit. And he was formerly chair of the Board of Trustees here at CASE. He's in the CEO Hall of Fame from Inside Business, and creator with his wife Shar of the Fowler Family Foundation. You won't meet a person with a bigger heart and sense of caring. Harry Halloran is the founder and CEO of Energy Unlimited. He's the chairman of Halloran Foundation, and his creativity and the works that he's doing all over the world. For example, a recent new book called The History of Human Well-Being. It's an awesome book. It just came out. It's something I recommend to everybody. Michelle Hunt, she's formerly executive VP at Herman Miller. And she was, at Herman Miller, she helped create one of the most powerful corporate cultures in terms of the human dimensions. She was appointed by President Clinton to serve as the executive director of the Federal Quality Institute. Tony Carr, he's the executive director of the Halloran Foundation. You heard him speak, advancing business for good all over the world through social entrepreneurship, and spearheading book projects such as The History of Business and Human Well-Being. Marcella Kanfer-Rolnick, she's vice chair of Gojo Industries, and they're on their way to touching the lives of 2 billion people a day in the protection against disease. And she's president and chair of the Lippman Cantor Family Foundation, director of the American Jewish World Service, and so many other things. Peter Senge, who we'll hear from in this conference, is named one of the top management thinkers of our century. The Fifth Discipline, his book, The Necessary Revolution, just a great systems thinker and builder of theory and practice. And then Fred Sau, the most recent member, the chairman of IMC Pan Asia group in 17 countries, involved with real estate, community development, and the investment field, but has a real heart and passion for advancing family business and the values that they bring. And he's concluded that the role of business is to serve human well-being and, quote, create wealth at the same time. Nadia Jackson-Baeva, her most recent book is Embedded Sustainability with Chris Laszlo, an incredible author and thinker, formerly the Coca-Cola chair at the Bled School of Management. Roberta Baskin, she just joined our board. She's a superstar journalist with 2020, Harvard Neiman Fellow, creator of this world conversation on the media called Images and Voices of Hope, a world conversation on lifting up a new kind of media. And she along with Claire Summer are the major stewards of Aim to Flourish. And we're gonna hear a lot about that. It's kind of a premiere showing here. And then finally, there's our dean, Rob Whiting, we could not be doing what we're doing without a dean that has a vision like he does for management as a noble profession. He has put so much time and energy into this. He's tireless. He's one of the best deans I have ever experienced, and he's gonna be retiring from dean soon. I'd like this whole group to stand up, and Rob, and just acknowledge just how precious your work is with us. Thank you all. And just keep standing. I'm not going to go through all the names of our just if the board can keep standing. And then the faculty and staff, I'm not going to go through all the names, but if Ron Fry and others can stand up and join them, Chris Laszlo, Claire, others. And then our distinguished fellows. You know, you're going to hear a lot about the research that our center is doing. An amazing group of people from Hunter Lovins and John Ehrenfeld and Yuma Barros. Again, I can't go through all the names. And the Fowler Center fellows, if you could stand up as well. So thank you all. That's where I So it all started for us. Ron and I launched the World Inquiry into Business as an Agent of World Benefit right after 9/11. And our feeling was when we saw the trade towers coming down, world and trade, we felt like there needs to be a conversation worldwide around the role of business in society, across cultures, across countries, and it became just very exciting as we got into it. As we got into it, word got out about the work, and we received a call that was awesome. Kofi Annan called, and his office called and said, we want to prepare and get ready for what would become the largest meeting in the history of the UN between business leaders and CEOs and the United Nations. And he wanted to tap into our large group appreciative inquiry process, something where my passion is and purpose is not just about change, but it's change at the scale of the whole. That's the issue today. How do we move a whole 67,000 person telecommunications company together? How do we move a whole Northeast Ohio economic region together? How do we move a whole business and society community through the UN Global Compact, not alone and isolated, but together? And in that meeting, Kofi Annan, this was about 2004, it was a time of huge turbulence, big debates about business and society, lots of protests at that meeting that we helped facilitate. But it was very rich indeed. And Kofi Annan started the whole thing by reaching out to the business leaders. And I think, the protests were happening, but I think in the back of his mind, he's saying there's no way we're going to eradicate extreme poverty in our world, in our Millennium Development Promises, without dignified work, without enlightened business, without economic opportunity. There's no way we're going to create cultures of peace and justice in high conflict zones, again, without economic opportunity, dignified work, and so on. And there's no way we're going to make this transition that the world needs, this once in a civilization, as Amory Lovins calls it, this civilizational opportunity of our time to move to a post-fossil fuel economy. So he reached out his hands and he said, let us choose today. Let us choose to unite the strengths of markets with the power of universal ideals, and let us choose to reconcile the forces of private entrepreneurship with the needs of the billions who live on less than $2 a day. Let us choose. Well, the CEOs responded. They came up to him and they said, let's form a process to elevate and spread innovations and build strategies together and form coalitions around major issues. And, you know, at first there were 50 companies, then there were 100, then there were 500. And at this time, by this time of this summit, there were about 1,000. 3 years later, what was so exciting for us at Case Western, as we facilitated, not only did we learn a lot about appreciative inquiry in very complex situations, but we got a bird's eye view in terms of something that Paul Hawken calls a blessed unrest, you know, kind of an uprising of a shared dreams and images for the future. You know, we had companies there like Bob Stiller. Bob Stiller created Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. He was a great colleague of ours and just made such a contribution. He helped create the United States Fair Trade movement in his company. What we noticed in his company was how alive people are when they're working on issues that are beyond the self, when they're working on issues and touching and building a better world. Several years later, the next meeting of that group, it went from 1,000 corporations then to 8,000 corporations, and Ban Ki-moon took over that project in Switzerland. And again, I felt feelings in that meeting in particular that I'd never felt before in terms of hope. I'm sitting at the table with people like Jeffrey Sachs, who he's pounding the table and saying, you know, we have to wake up. He had written the book on the economic process of how we can eradicate extreme grinding poverty in our lifetime or less. And he said, it's just such a special time. And Jane Nelson from Harvard, who heads up the Kennedy School of Social Responsibility, she said, look at all the innovations happening in renewable energy, and Vienna's work where they spray on solar cells onto windows and everything can start to become a power source. And, you know, and story after story, Jennifer Deckard telling her stories of Fairmont Minerals, who was named the #1 corporate citizen in the United States 2 years after they launched their sustainability efforts. So I came away from that meeting just feeling, you know, tremendous excitement. And in that meeting, it wasn't just talking heads or pre-negotiated agreements. It was really interactive, collaborative dialogue. And I'll remember one of the, in the stages of appreciative inquiry, in the dream stage, we started talking about one of the things that the conference board has found is that in their studies of what catalyzes leaders like Chuck Fowler and Lyle Clark and so on, one of the things that they found is that it's discussions with their daughter. That was the only common element that they found, was it was discussions, enlightening, powerful, deep discussions with their daughter. And it was the only common thing that they found. So we used that to help that assembly begin to envision the future that we want to create. So again, we were in the dream phase here of the process. And I just want to, I love this quote, you know, from the poet Rilke: you must give birth to your images. They are the future waiting to be born. Fear not the strangeness you feel. The future must enter you long before it ever happens, just waiting for the birth, for the hour of new clarity. So I have kind of a summed up version of what that vision was in that assembly, and then as we partnered to create the global compact, or to create this global forum with the UN. And this is kind of a summary of 4 major meetings. We asked them to imagine the world and the economy we want to create. Here's what they said: it's a bright green restorative economy that purifies the air we breathe. It has eliminated the very concept of waste and toxic byproduct. Extreme poverty has been eradicated from the planet. The economy is powered by 100% renewable and abundant energy and is saving the decarbonized world trillions in lower costs. It's a world of freer and truer markets with signals that generate positive incentives aligned with the longer-term greater good. Thus, it's virtually eliminated perverse incentives. The economy's industry-leading stars are celebrated as creators of sustainable value, where the word sustainability as less bad has been replaced with sustainability as flourishing, as net positive. What we see when we look around are resilient and bright green walkable cities with regenerative agricultural practices and astonishing exponential technologies for advancing health and connections for super cooperation. And all of this is built on an economy of institutions that are widely trusted as positive institutions, workplaces that elevate, that magnify, that bring back to the world our highest human strengths, like wisdom, like courage, like humanity, compassion, freedom, hope, joy. And we've built, this was the last sentence, we've built a bridge from an unsustainable industrial age to a future that embraces the idea of full spectrum flourishing. We have redesigned the material basis of our civilization successfully. So that came out of 3 major meetings. And that's again where I really love our motto here at the Case Western Reserve University, to think beyond the possible. There's no question in my mind that within our lifetime, within a decade or 2, or at least a generation, that we will eradicate extreme poverty. We're living in such a special time, as Jeffrey Sachs talks to it. Well, I think we will be so far on our way to this shift to 100% renewable energy, design of this growth-promoting circular economy, and on and on and on. So in terms of our flow, what happened then is that we realized in that meeting with the United Nations that we wanted to bring together scholars and academics with executives, and that we needed a place to do that in kind of a really bold theory practice way. So in 2006, we launched the Global Forum with the Academy of Management and the United Nations Global Compact. Academy of Management at that time was about 19,000 professors from 190 countries. And it was really a wonderful liftoff. Part of it was inspired by a conversation that we had with Peter Drucker shortly before he passed away. We were talking to him about this idea of business as an agent of world benefit, and with a twinkle in his eye, he's 93 years old, he says, "Well, David, I wrote about it many years ago." he said, and the quote was, "Every single social and global issue of our day is a business opportunity in disguise, waiting for the imagination and an innovative entrepreneur, waiting for the caring leader, waiting for the pragmatism of business to get things done." So it was kind of the beginning of an idea of Conference 3.0, where it wasn't just a lot of speakers, but we wanted to build a lot of interaction into it as well. Conference 1.0 is a lot of speakers, like good TED Talks and so on, that's great. And then we have kind of networking meetings go on in these sessions. But here they wanted to try and collectively accomplish some things. Just as one example, it gave birth to something so significant in our view, in our partnership with Jonas Hartley. It gave birth to PRIME, Principles for Responsible Management Education. Today, there's some 650 schools signed on to advance principles of leadership responsibility in the world. And it's part of the United Nations Global Compact. The second one, we started saying, okay, in the first one, we really looked at the great trade-off illusion and so on and said, is this, how do we overcome this great trade-off illusion? And so the second one was on the theme of design and design thinking. And you could see our building over here. It was inspired by the great architect Frank Gehry. And our colleagues who wrote one of the first books about management as design, Dick Bolin and Fred Colopy. So that is where we started to give birth to something like the Aim to Flourish. The seed and the design team that started working on it, that started happening. IDEO was one of our partners in that. The third Global Forum was around the work that Chris Laszlo and our fellows, research fellows, kind of began to look at this question of why are so many organizations that start out quickly out of the blocks around sustainability, why are they hitting such a brick wall? And I won't say too much more about it. Chris is going to set this up, but it was inspired by John Ehrenfeld's work at MIT and his belief that even the language and the way we were talking about sustainability is totally off, you know, as less harm and so on. And he raised the concept of flourishing, and I'll come back to that. That summit, that particular conference gave birth to several other big research projects that you'll hear about here on quantum leadership. And Ron Fry and I brought together a special issue of the Journal of Corporate Citizenship around the positive psychology of sustainability. I think the opportunity here to take this all a huge step further is very exciting. And I think one of the exciting possibilities here is that there is a couple tectonic shifts that I think, if they come together, can just really create an amazing force for change. One of those tectonic shifts is the whole shift in psychology. Years ago, you know, like Marty Seligman, when he was president of the APA, he noticed that out of 44,000 journal articles, 98.9% of those articles were on human deficiency, on human deficit, on what's wrong with the human being. 98.9% of those articles. There were almost no studies, for example, of hope, inspiration, and joy. All the studies were on depression and anger and breakdown and so on. And so he said, maybe we should have a 50-50, you know, at least a 50-50. Why not a science of human strengths and a science of human flourishing and well-being? Let's aim higher. What does flourishing look like and where is it happening and so on? Well, my whole bookshelf is completely changed. My life is changed as I enter into the amazing work that's being done there. One of his first works with Chris Peterson was, instead of this diagnostic manual of mental illness, for the first time they created an encyclopedia of human strengths. And it's being used in schools and companies all over the world. Marty's an amazing person. He and I did some speeches together in Australia, and he was focused on the individual level, and I focused on the institutional level. And what I realized was every single story I shared had to do with companies that were doing good and doing well. And so we'll come back to that. But one of the key concepts, he's kind of, in this book, he brings together the whole of the findings, and he uses the acronym PERMA to kind of signify all the great works coming together. P stands for positive emotion. You know, flourishing is made up of positive emotion, hope, inspiration, joy, and so on. E stands for engagement of our signature human strengths, wisdom, courage. You know, R stands for the capability to develop life-giving relationships that aren't toxic, but high-quality connections. M stands for meaning and significance, and A for accomplishment. Anyway, there's tremendous measures now that are replacing GMP, using this measure, for example, and creating measures for gross national happiness. John Ehrenfeld's work. And so this is where I see the possibility coming together of, you know, management and economics and some of the greatest work, I think, and the greatest tectonic shift in psychology we've seen in recent years. And Chris will talk a little bit more about John's work and leading to their book on the flourishing enterprise. Again, I'm going to leave that up to Chris. But the other possibility that I see is bringing a lot of this together with the positive psychology field, the whole idea of positive institutions that elevate our highest human strengths, bring those back and combine those strengths, where we start thinking of institutions not as clients, but as the change agents to magnify and bring more love into the world, more courage into the world, more humanity, and so on. So one of our special guests is going to be Barbara Fredrickson. She's my favorite thinker in the whole positive psychology field. Marty called her the genius of the positive psychology movement. Her precise work at the University of Michigan, for example, in her laboratory, isolating emotions like hope, inspiration, joy, you know, and her books that are coming out. I'll say more about her. But this book on positivity belongs in every family, every leader's bookshelf, and I recommend it to everyone. This was one of the things that came out too, where we started talking about, kind of this mirror flourishing idea. Ron Frya and I did a journal on the positive psychology of sustainability. And the one simple message that comes out is building a better world is the most potent force on the planet for building inside the company the most engaged, effective, alive organization. So anyway, my sense of hope at this time that's turbulent, at this time where there's a lot of, in my view, political regression, but I still, as we do these studies and we work with the leaders like yourselves, my sense of hope just goes up and up and up. And I woke up today, as I went through Atlanta the other week, I stopped at the Martin Luther King Memorial. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but there's a glass case with one of his last speeches. And in that glass case, it's handwritten notes. And I looked through it and I read the speech and I had tears in my eyes. And the speech was given on the eve of his assassination, the day before he was assassinated. And I'm looking at the speech and it starts with a comment. He had a meeting with God. And God spoke to him and said, Martin Luther, this is a dangerous time, and I know that you're feeling there could be something happening here. He said, and so God said, so I want to give you the opportunity to live at any point in history, any time, any era. I want to give you a panoramic tour of all of history. We're going to go to Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. We're going to visit the Greek city-states and the birth of democracy. We're going to visit the Renaissance age, and I want you to choose where you would want to be, and you get that choice, that wish. And in his speech, he said, you know what I told God? He said, I told God that I don't want to be in any of those other places. Where I want to be is right now at this time. This is a time where every thought we make makes a difference. Every utterance we make, every interaction that we take, and every action that we take with others can make a difference. And that's what I feel about our time. That's what I feel about this community. I feel like we have a huge opportunity.